And recording is we're live. So welcome everybody. Today is the 29th of November, a few days after Thanksgiving in the US. This is Dallas Personal Robotics Group, Builders Night Virtual, Builders Night Out. We'll do the usual thing and go around the table with a little bit of show and tell and some Stump the Club style questions. Just as a reminder, these are free to attend. Everybody's welcome. You can follow this link to learn more about upcoming meetings and other information. We don't require membership, but a lot of the regulars do put in a little nominal something to help us cover costs of running the club, which is an actual 501c organization. So housekeeping, the stuff on the left hasn't changed much lately. We do have a tentative placeholder for the 10th of December. Iron Rain Robotics team out of South Dallas will give us an update on their progress in the season and also practice their presentation. And we have a kind of running list of other ideas. Would anyone like to add anything to this housekeeping upcoming list before we dive?
When is their competition that they've asked for dredges? What day? Is it the next week?
I might be mixed. I might be wrong. This is the 17th. The 10th is the competition.
That's what I thought. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
And if you haven't started the process of getting on the judge list, I strongly recommend that you start to do it this week. And it really would be cool if we could take a bunch of people down there to help them out.
How many do we have on the call that have already kind of like started?
Me, obviously, but
you're doing it.
I'm going to do it for sure. And I think, Mike, didn't you say you were going to do it?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Cool.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, because I don't see it. There it is. Yeah, I've signed up this morning, as a matter of fact.
Okay, excellent.
So I'm waiting on my clearance.
So what I'll do is I'll put in here Iron Rain Robotics is you can learn more at this link right here. And then who do we put in as an email? Isn't there a like Iron Rain Robotics email or something if you want to volunteer?
Just send it over. Just send it to Kareem, I think.
But what's his email? I forget.
Oh, you don't know? Let me go check.
Okay. Well, we'll look it up and put it in here. We'll put it in the chat window. All right. So that's what we have. Oh, I wasn't presenting, was I? That's really, really bad. Okay. So all right. So anyhow, I think we keep going. We have in queue Doug, and then myself, Carl, Dave Ackley, Pat, and anyone else want to get in the queue before we get rolling? Nope. Okay. So Doug, take it away.
Okay, give me a second. I was trying to find that email, but give me a second.
Okay.
I actually got it. I'm going to paste it. There's a lot of stuff there. So.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Even got it has a link. Looks like the link is live.
Yeah, that's including your user email. So,
oh, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, we'll just ask people to.
Is it? I can't see a bunch of it. It aired out anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
Carl, it's pondersome64@gmail.com.
Is that the one he? Okay.
That's the one I have.
Yeah.
Pondersome.
That sounds right.
I know that's his personal one, but I think he has a. I think he has an Iron Rain Robotics one too.
Oh, here it is. I'm going to send this other one.
Okay.
post this other one.
Okay, that'd be good. My computer's acting really strange tonight.
I don't know if that doesn't seem to be.
Okay.
Did it add it
Well,
all?
let's figure that out offline, and we'll put it into the Slack, and
Okay.
and then let's just get going. So, Doug, if you want to.
Okay, I guess what I wanted to show, just a piece of kit. See this module here? This is a 5-volt, 10 amp supply. Okay, you have two inputs, which you bring in anywhere from 12 to 24. Testing shows that it'll actually be 11, so it can work on a 3S LiPo. So if you want a robust BEC, I guess it's called battery elimination circuit. Yeah, BEC. This is one way to centralize it into just one module. I believe these are used on golf carts. They're about $12, and I'll put the link in the chat. Anyway, it's something that I'm exploring as a supply. One thing I'm a little concerned about is that it puts out 5 volts. And you know, Raspberry Pis often want 5.1, so they don't go into what they call low voltage problems. So I don't know about that yet, but it's a pretty cool little module. It seems to be pretty robust. So
Doug, is that a boost buck?
it's a buck.
Just a buck.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
Otherwise, you put 12 or 24, but anywhere between. And like I said, I saw it work at 11. So anywhere 11 to about 24 in, and then you get 5 volts out. And obviously, if you're using a higher voltage, you're going to be using less current. So if you were to pull 10 amps out on the thing, what I saw, it looks like you'd be drawing about 4.5 amps off your supply. So
Even
if it's 12 volts.
Even if you do get a low voltage warning on a Raspberry Pi, if you're only 0.1 volts off, does it really affect the Pi's performance that much?
I just know that on the 3s, it was really a problem. Okay, on the 4s, I don't know, because they seem to, first of all, they fixed their power supplies. Originally, the power supplies that they provided were 5-volt power supplies at 2.5 amps. And what they really should have did is had a 5.1 supply at 2.5 amps, and they would have saved everybody a lot of grief.
Well, what I'm asking is, yeah, you get a low voltage indicator, but
I think it pauses. I think it pauses state. I think so. We'd have to read. I'm not sure, but I know it did screw a lot of people up. Yeah. So anyway, it's something I'm looking at for my new robot that I'm going to have. I've got a visitor from Colorado Springs that some of the old timers will know. His name is Rick Swan. He's coming to visit me for a couple of days, and we'll be talking serious robots during that time period. So we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping to lay out the plans for next year's competition robot.
Okay, here we have a case.
Okay. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead.
I posted Kareem's email there on the.
Okay.
Yeah, good deal. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've added it to the slide. So
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so anyway, that's all I had to show. I'll get the link and put it in the chat.
Okay. Then it's my turn then, I think. All right, so I'm going to actually hit the present button this time. And see if the computer is behaving well tonight. David Steele. Oh, Stream. All right. Welcome, guys. Kareem, we were just making a plug for you for Iron Rain upcoming competition judges, and we use the Iron Rain Robotics as your preferred email for what that's worth. All right. So I'm going to go through an update now. So if y'all remember when when we had the Robo Columbus competition a week and a bit ago, had this slight issue where old duct tape and baling wire was heading pretty well towards the cone, and then on the second and third runs at the last minute, it said, "Oh, yep, that's the cone," and it turned around, but it was about 20 feet too far away. So I started looking into what was causing that, and I'm going to take you through 4 or 5 little videos where I think I've kind of nailed it down. I've isolated it, and but I want to get everyone's thoughts, and then I have an open question on how to address it. So first of all, let me just run through these videos, and I think the audio should play. I'm going to do it this way instead of the OBS. Okay, here we have a case. Things screwing. So did you all hear it audio when I was playing that? You can see audio. Display. Good. Dark because the lens cap is on. But even with that, you can see that it is false triggering in a way. Okay, so I'm going to pause it there. So what I've done since the contest is I've added 2 piezos because with a single logic, I put a low on either of those piezos, and I can just make them make an audible sound. So really fast audible feedback in terms of what the detector is seeing with the camera, instead of having to try and watch.
By the way, the sound didn't come through very well.
It didn't come through very well.
Yeah, pretty low volume.
Pretty low volume. Well, I'll turn it up to 125% VLC lets me do. So let's try this again. So basically there's a middle light in here, but listen for the beeps. And if you'll notice at the very start, the lens cap is on. And what I didn't explain at the start of this is that I have a low tone that I'll present, a low tone when it sees the cone. And then based on a kind of a width criteria and the aspect ratio, then it gives a high tone when it thinks it's touched the cone. So, see that the display is dark because, but here I have the display covered. But even with that, you can see that it is false triggering in a way. Beep, right? So the green light is showing that it's detecting a cone now and then, and the high beep we hear is out of sync with the green light, means that it's touched the cone. So what this represents is, I believe it represents serial port bit errors from the OpenMV cam to the Arduino Mega. And it's just sporadic because it shouldn't be detecting anything right now. And yet, it's getting bad data. Conversely, if we would look at the image, we would see that even when the light flashes, there's no cone detected. Because if there was a cone detected, it would look like this. How obnoxious is that? The low tone means it sees an orange cone, and the high tone means that it's hit a wide enough cone. So anyhow, bit error on the serial port. And I'm going to turn this off to stop bugging my wife. Okay, so that was the first sign of what was going on. And now the next one. Okay, here we see the case where there's some kind of problem. So we see that there's a nice steady recognition of the cone, right? If we stop the cone, there's no. But when there's a nice steady recognition of the cone, which is indicated here, we see that every about 1 second, this shows that it's about every second. It's active low. So it's on when it's low, the buzzer is, which means that it sees the cone. So this thing is sending frames about 10 per second. And it means that about every 10th cycle, it's getting missed here. For whatever reason, it's getting screwed up. So the detection goes away for every 10th sample for some reason. Don't understand exactly why, but that's what's happening. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, I got 2 or 3 more. Okay, this shows some kind of communication problem that's going on. We can see that there's a nice steady cone being detected by the OpenMV cam, but as the serial port comes down, we see that the cone detector is dropping out every so often, and that's just not very good. So we can see from the oscilloscope that it's actually happening about 2 times a second, more or less. So each of these 1/10 of a second sample period, that's the frame rate that we're getting data from the OpenMV cam at about 10 hertz down to the mega, which is hiding underneath. And we see that it's dropping out. It's active low. So we see that the cone detector is failing about, in this case now, it's every twice a second. Now, the funny thing is that if we look at the OpenMV IDE, it behaves a little differently than when the IDE is not connected. But we can see that the frame rate that it's calculating when connected is about 7 hertz here, although it's only updating the screen at about 3.5 hertz. But we can see that it's nice and steady. Anyhow, every sample up there, and also in this parentheses here, we have a check bit, and then cone detected, and so it's cone detected as 1 means that it's always detecting the cone. It's just not dropping out. So local within the OpenMV cam, it's always there. But for some reason, it's not making it down consistently. The recognition after the UART transfer is not consistent down the. Okay, so that's telling, right? So now, and then here's the same kind of setup with the oscilloscope, but without the IDE connected. We see that it's still dropping out every so often. Before it was happening about dropping out about 1 every 10 frames. Now it's about 1 every 1.4 seconds. You can see 0.2 seconds per division. So there's something not healthy about how. So the whole behavior changes when you hook up the IDE and slow it down. Not too surprising. Okay, so now the next thing I did was I changed the kind of protocol code that it uses. So I changed the fundamental protocol from getting down to the issue now, from the OpenMV to the Arduino, and then this is after I made the protocol changes. So before, the protocol was allowing, for whatever reason, it even though there was a good source data coming in, the protocol was capturing pretty often. It was just giving bad data to the Arduino. The issue now, you see that there's no cone in sight to the camera. Now there's a low tone when we see the cone. That's as intended. There's a low cone, and this light shows as green, but it should be a solid green. It should not be dropping out like that. Now, as we bring it close, and it meets the detection window of being too wide or wide enough, then it indicates that it's hit the cone with the higher tone. But when it's smaller, it should just be a low tone like that. So we notice this is dropping out, but it's a solid data. So why is this happening? So let's turn this around, and we see that even if we cover the lens cap so that there's no data, it's just crazy. It's detecting the cone even though there's no visual input. And here I've stopped this, and this shows the issue right here. So we see that it's a serial parsing issue and trying to get the data from the OpenMV to the other. We can see that this is my frame indicator of 4.4 and then a year and month date. That indicates no cone in sight. But we can see here that the 21127, that's actually, instead of showing what should be the X position of the cone, it's showing the framing error. So it's missing the position. It's not parsing correctly. There's 442, right? The very first bit. That might have been download data, but 4422. So we can see that whenever it's beeping like that, when the cone is uncovered, we can see that, hello, each beep, come on, beep, beep, beep. Each beep reveals fresh data. Yep. So every time it beeps, it's a. Okay, so I think that gets the point across. But so that's what I found basically, that I got a data problem from the camera to the Arduino, and yeah. So that leads to my question now, or if anyone has some comments before I ask my question. No. Okay. So my question is, because I haven't messed this robot uses the UART, just basic boring old UART from the OpenMV cam to the Arduino, and I haven't messed with the UARTs much before. So in practice. So this particular code uses Arduino construct of serial.parseInt. And has anyone used that before, serial.parseInt?
Hey, Carl, what's your baud rate?
A mere 9,600.
Okay, so it's not really fast.
No. And I haven't checked the voltage levels yet, but I think I did put a level adapter in because OpenMV is 3.3 and Arduino is 5. Something. But I was looking at, I was wondering if you all just did raw, like read a byte at a time and parse it yourself, or if you use some other libraries to pass things larger than a byte.
Carl, is that driver you're using interrupt driven?
I think the UART. So I pull so no. I wait for bytes to accumulate in the UART register buffer, and then I periodically pull it. And then if there's more than I shortened it. It used to wait for 16 bytes to accumulate. Now I only wait for 8 bytes to accumulate. So if 8 bytes accumulate, then I call this serial.parseInt. serial.parseInt. And that function, from what I read on Arduino, it tries to just read through the UART until it sees something that looks like an integer, and then it returns it. And I think what's happening is that it's, in the source side, I don't have any conscious delimiters for an integer or a non-integer, so I think it's about like it's like half the time or more. It's or actually like 60 or 70% of the time, it's actually detecting the integer and what I call the frame qualifier. So for 4 bytes, for one of 3 values, so the odds of getting the wrong value is pretty low.
So how many total bytes are in a frame?
8. 4 of them 4 bytes carry the like a fixed marker, and then 2 characters worth of information. So I use 8 bits to say no cone hit. So I have a lot of wasted bytes. Bits.
Well, this may not be something that you'd want to pursue, but I've run into
I'm
similar.
happy to take the dog out. I'll be back.
We'll be looking for you.
Where there's problems that are involved in buffering and parsing of what is essentially a real-time stream. So at 9600 baud, let's call that 1,000 bytes per second, and you're getting 8 of those bytes in repetitive groups. Is that correct?
Yeah. So let's say those 8 bytes come 10 times a second.
So they're not streamed continuously. They're coming out in bunches. 8 bytes wait, 8 bytes wait.
The camera does a frame sample, it does its math, and then it spits out 8 bytes. and it does that 10 times a second. So it's pretty low bandwidth overall.
Well, what I was going to suggest is that the way I have solved similar problems is basically the UART generates an interrupt when it completes receiving a character.
Yeah.
And that interrupt drives a state machine. In your case, it would be a simple state machine because you only got 8 bytes. It's not like reading a NMA paragraph or something like that, where each byte basically drives the next state. And that gets rid of all the buffering and all the parsing and everything.
So so do you think he's overrunning the buffer, or I'm not exactly sure how this UART works? Is it just basically a byte by byte FIFO?
I
You don't read
believe
fast enough, you lose data?
I haven't dug into it, but I believe it's just a FIFO and it's just coming in. So I'm checking the FIFO 50 times a second, and the data is coming in 10 times a second. And if the data is full, I can read it out easily. So I haven't added code in there to clear it, but I don't think it's a problem of the buffer overrunning getting lost. I think what's happening is that, like, if I would pull up the documentation for this Arduino serial.parseInt method, it shows that there's a lot of complexity buried behind that thing. And what it's trying to do is to try to read out the bytes from the UART buffer and make sense of them and then align them and like turn
No,
4 bytes
Carl,
into a long or something.
is it a text string you're parsing?
No, I mean, I'll show you.
Oh, it's an actual 4 bytes of a 4-byte integer.
That's another ambiguity that I mean, I haven't messed with stuff quite at this level yet. Let me pull it up and show you, because it's being sourced from MicroPython, and
Well, there's your problem. It's MicroPython. You know.
Is that the answer?
No.
I need to put C# on my.
Yeah, that'll fix it. And also, the other problem is you're not using blockchain. If you're using blockchain, you would never have this problem.
Blockchain robot. That's it.
My quick solution, which you probably won't like, is just use a couple digital I/O pins and set it the pins high if it's detected, and second pin high if it's touched.
Well, so that's fine for the state, but here's the thing. I also want to send a value that shows where the center of the cone is in the image, left to right.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I could fit into a byte, so I think I could do that. But I mean, I figure, masters and W's should be able to figure out how to send an integer across a serial port, right?
Right. Yeah, you should be able to do that.
It should be able to do that. So, or at least should be able to copy somebody else's who's done it before. So, like, this is the OpenMV H7 code, and literally it just takes and it outputs this on the serial port. So this has one of 3 values basically. So basically, it's an int, a Python int, which I guess can be pretty long compared to an Arduino int. So that's all I do. I output that int, and then this is another int. So I output that int. So I just output 2 ints and then loop back and do it again on the next image. And then in the Mega, I simply, I made it a little more complicated. Now, if there's more than 8 bytes of serial data, then I ask it to parse. I use this magic method, serial parseInt, and it pulls that out. And then I check to see if it's one of those 3 magic values. And then if it is, I say, okay, well, at least it looks like I've got this packet aligned bitwise. So then I'll ask it to parse the next integer, and I'll treat that as the cone position. And then I'll do a further check to say, well, I really only care about cone positions in this range. If I parse an integer that's outside of that range, then I know that's another data error because I'm never sending data outside of that range. So, and then it's only when I get into here that I have a pretty high confidence that it's qualified good data. So if it's outside of that, now I'll write to the console for these goofy conditions. But it's showing that like this frame error is happening 1 in 10 times, and this one, it's 1 in even less.
Yeah, when the data is bad, what does it look like when you get bad data? Is it pretty consistent?
Yeah, I mean, I can show you actually real time if I hook up.
Yeah, I could see it getting 1 byte off or something.
Well,
Yeah,
That's what I was suggesting, not that it was buffer overruns. But
Yeah,
that
check.
just you're getting out of sync with the data.
Yeah, the data that you're displaying is in base 10. Convert that to hex. It might reveal some clues. I mean, when you get bad data coming in.
Well, I'm telling you, even just letting it come out in base 10 is pretty revealing, and that's why I'm asking. I mean, sorry. Yeah, so we can see here that there's more than 8 bytes in the 254th cycle of the 20 millisecond loop. It checked and it found more than 8 bytes, but there was no frame qualifier. Instead, it found 0. And some of these, it's getting close to the right one. It should be 44, 22, 1127, like this. So here, this is a case where it had the valid frame qualifier. So the first int it parsed was correct.
Well, wait. So this is coming in not as binary data, but it's coming in as ASCII.
I think it's getting displayed as ASCII. It's running through this transmorph. I mean, this method right here. This is what's taking the bytes out of the buffer, and it's returning an integer.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is the integers you're displaying, they all start with the same numbers. So that tells me the data you're receiving from the data that you're receiving is coming in probably as it's coming in from your device as ASCII, because you always get the same leading numbers.
Well, remember, it's looking for that. So, and it's not always the same leading numbers, right? So here's a minus something. So remember, this is the byte. I send 2 integers. So I send this one of 3 values like this so that I can recognize it. And then I send a number that should be in the range of -180 to +180.
Right. But my point is, if that number wasn't exactly, if you didn't get that number or close to it, why would you get a small number that starts with the same digits?
Like here?
Yeah. Or like the one above it, 4422.
Well, 4422 is the first bit. That one makes sense to me. The 440 doesn't.
The first bit of what?
This is the first 4 digits. Well,
yeah, okay. What I'm saying is that number, if that's a decimal number,
yeah,
that requires 2 bytes to represent it.
exactly.
All right. So if you were just like missing a byte, or if you had an extra byte, you would see a completely different number that didn't start with 4422. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or
Or
that tells me the data that's coming to you is probably coming in as ASCII, because if you dropped a character or several characters, you'd still start with 4422. But if it was coming in as binary and you dropped a byte, you'd get a completely different number.
So yeah, to clarify, it looks to me like reading the documentation, parsin is meant to parse an ASCII string that contains an integer.
Right.
Ah,
So that tells me it looks like you're dropping bytes because the first portion of the string is still preserved. The full 422 is still preserved, but then the rest of it is missing.
yeah, many times. Yeah.
Yeah, Carl, was using the same, the OpenMVH7. I just send a single byte for the X value, the centroid of the blob, and actually, it's set the camera resolution to 320 by 240. And so 320 actually takes 9 bits to represent. So I divide it by 2, or just shift it 1 byte to, and I do lose, it's
No,
1 bit of resolution.
yeah. So what? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't have to frame it or synchronize to it because I'm just sending a byte. And then if the camera doesn't see a blob, I send I think it's
Specific character.
well a number over 160, because 160 multiplied by 2 is 320. So I think I send like 500 or something. And then but I still do the division before I send it, and then the multiplication of times 2 before I use it, and then that way I can detect whether I have a blob or I don't have a blob, and if I do have a blob, what the X value is. But I think in some of the examples, and that's why I went with the serial interface. He had said that I think the SPI interface and the I2C interface may hiccup occasionally because I guess the chip is doing a lot of stuff and
Yeah.
processing the images. But and then I wouldn't have to those interfaces are a little more complicated than asynchronous stuff. It just seemed the simplest way to do it. But and I think I'd have to look at the code on the ESP32. I think I do check range. So if it's not in range, I throw it out, and then just carry on like it didn't receive a number indicating that it found a blob. So
Yeah.
it's still,
Yeah.
and that seemed to work pretty good.
So to kind of summarize what I was saying, it looks like you're successfully, as you're polling for new data, you're successfully detecting that you're at the start of a string. There's an ASCII string coming in that it's a representation of an integer. And you're starting to read that out. And then at some point, something causes you to stop and lose the rest of the string.
Oh yeah, that was a question I had. Do you check the length of the string
Yeah.
when it comes in?
This is literally the code right here. It asks if it's available. Now it asks if it's greater than 8. So if there's more than that many things in the receive buffer that haven't been read out yet,
Yep.
it attempts to parse the first one, and then it does a quick check. And then if that first check looks good, then it attempts to parse the second one.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a signal that there are 8 or more characters in your buffer, right?
Yeah.
And then you try to start reading those 8 characters out, and then all of a sudden something cuts you off, and you only get 4 characters, 5 characters, and then the rest of them are lost.
So that was, and that was one thing I was thinking about, was maybe to wrap around this thing, like interrupt disable or something. But
yeah, that might be a good start. Is if you're getting interrupted by something and you're not getting the data out fast enough, and the buffer's getting overrun. Is there any way on this interface that you could detect buffer overrun?
I have no idea. I mean, I haven't looked at it that closely yet. Because on the one hand, I'm interested in how would we approach, something that passes more than a byte at a time, and what if you guys have
Okay.
done it? And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, screw it, I can just make this be a 2-byte deal, and be done with it, and just do a byte at a time. Because I'm hearing that like this is a relatively complicated function in what it does. I definitely see ambiguity in like how it behaves versus what the spec says. And I'm hearing that like Ray's using a simple byte at a time, maybe Doug too. And I'm hearing even David Anderson, you basically do a byte at a time, and then you do your parsing a byte at a time with a state machine, but still you're
And
very
there's
much
a-
Johnny
there's
on the spot, byte at a time. It comes in, you handle it.
And there's a function built into C that you're probably familiar with called A to I, ASCII to integer.
Uh,
That
I haven't ever used it really.
well, that's probably what your function is calling.
Yeah.
And you just handed a string, a zero terminated string, which it then attempts to convert to an integer.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Uh,
that's
Hey,
that's
Carl.
another good point. Because if that's what it's doing under the hood, then it can also be a matter of you're reading. You got more than 8 bytes in the buffer, but one of them's a 0, so that terminates your string.
Yeah.
The closest I have to something similar is the code that reads the tiltometer on the balancing robot, and it's only a little more complicated than that. But basically, the state machine, which is driven by the interrupt, sits there in its initial state looking for a header byte, and there's actually 4 header bytes. So if it gets the first header byte, then it cycles into the next state, which looks for the second header byte. If it doesn't get the second header byte, it goes back to the first state, and so on. When it gets all 4 of those, then it collects the next 4 and calls an ASCII to integer to do.
Here's something you could try. The serial 1 object. Can you read the raw data out without doing a parse out?
I mean, we could look the methods on the Arduino thing.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah.
I put a link in the chat.
Yeah.
That's what I use to talk to my Pi, from my Pi to my Teensy. And
Right.
it worked really well. So that's one thing on to do my, what do they call this? Pixie to my Arduino. I had an intermediate subprocessor, which essentially, when it communicated to my main processor, it only sent 1 bit. And what I did is I took 80 characters in the middle of of 255, I can't remember. And I took the 240 pixel field and grouped it in groups of 4. I was saying, so otherwise, instead of 240, I turned it into 80. Or maybe it's 360 and I turned it into 80. But so each number, so like if it was perfectly in the center, it would be the middle of that 80 character field that you could, I think it was set. Maybe it was character 100. Okay. So it would have been, if you got 100, you were in the middle. If you were 101, and you didn't care what 101 was, you were within 4 pixels to that side. If you were 99, you were 4 pixels to the other side. And then there was that left a lot of characters left over. And I used one of them as you don't see anything. So if it didn't see anything, it sent I don't see anything character.
Yeah.
And that worked really well for Pixie. And I just constantly ran. And this link that I put in, that worked really well from my Pi, which was in Python, to my Teensy, which was in Arduino. So those were 2. And then when the third time that I've had to tackle a problem like this was when I had a little 16, you've probably seen it. I have a 16 character display that writes code based on state machines. It tells you where you are in the menu, and it sends material. And that's that routine. I worked with God, what's his name? Delta somebody. What that's his
Ron Grant, Delta
Ron Grant. Yeah, Ron Grant. Ron Grant actually took me aside and outlined it for me and got me started on it. And that little piece of code, I believe, is in the DPRG repositories. And it just, all it does is it uses our Arduino and it talks to your Mega in your case, and just transfer. There's just routines that are constantly talking back and forth depending on what you want to do.
Carl, here's another thing you may or may not have noticed is that occasionally when you get a value that doesn't start with 4422,
Yeah.
it looks like the rest of the string that it was expecting, like 1127.
Yeah.
So that also tells me that basically something's cutting you off in the middle of the string. Either it's encountering a null and it's saying, oh, this must be the end of the string, or something's interrupting the process by what you're trying to get data out of the buffer, and the rest of it is still there.
Yeah, my first thought would be is when you're asking for it to be available, you should just pull off a bit until you get the ones that you know are starting the field, and then you should allow it to accumulate up to 8 bits, and then you read it. Or it wouldn't be 8 anymore because you've taken the start field off.
Well,
So that's sort of what I was trying to describe with the state machine.
yeah.
Basically, you go back to the first state as soon as you get an error. So if you've got 4 header characters coming in, then you'll have a state, I'll call it 0, 1, 2, and 3, that says, okay, now next should come some data. So I'm just going to read the next 4 bytes, and then I'll try to convert them. But in any event, if you don't get those, or if there's any error, then you go back to state 0. So that basically you're constantly resyncing yourself. And it looks like here what's happening is you're getting out of sync.
Yeah, I agree.
Remember what you're seeing down below is the exceptions. This is showing the times when it's out of sync. It's not showing all the times that it's actually in sync.
Yeah.
Because it's actually in sync a fair bit. So in a way, I think this is doing what you described, David. It's just that instead of parsing a byte at a time until you get the right pattern, it's relying on this method, which I don't apparently know enough about, to try and look for that pattern. And I was wondering if perhaps this method itself could be, maybe it's getting interrupted, like John says, or maybe it's hitting some internal counter or something, and that's why it's misaligning itself because it's properly detecting an integer. Because I didn't do anything specifically in the source code to,
It does seem like that you have a lot of code there to do could be done in a much simpler fashion.
Like in 3 characters and yeah, it could be. I mean, in the case of I've run into problems before, both on robots and in other work, when you have data streaming in and going into a buffer, and then you go into that buffer and try to sync up with it, and that can be problematic. So I think that the combined wisdom here of your colleagues is that everybody else deals with it byte by byte. That seems to be the way to deal with it, byte by byte.
Definitely look at that link, though. I think that might be the just cut and paste solution. With you'll have to modify it a little bit, but
yeah. And if you can get Python to send binary, that should be easier to deal with than having to parse ASCII text.
Yeah, and that's where it's not clear to me because I never did. I didn't trace down what that output function is doing in MicroPython. So what I'm hearing you guys say is that the appearance is that output is taking an integer in and it's outputting an ASCII string on a serial port.
Like. Yeah. And Ted is right. If you don't have to do that fancy dance going back and forth between ASCII and binary, that might solve a lot of problems right there. Although it is the American standard for computer information interface.
Is that where ASCII came from? How about that?
Hey, Carl, have you tried speeding up your communication? I think you said you're at 9,600 baud.
Well, that was another. I haven't gone there yet, but I was tempted to bounce it up to 56 or 192 or something.
Well, you know, that's a good point.
I run 115 with typically without an issue. You know, you're only communicating across whatever 6 or 12 inches of wire.
Yeah.
And if it's something that it's interrupting your transmission on your serial, well, that would, because typically there's a hardware interface on both those, I believe on the MicroPython chips and on the Arduino side that takes care of the ASCII buffers back and forth, transmit, receive. So
that's a real good point. Maybe if you can just squirt them through faster, that this timing problem will go away.
Yeah, makes sense.
That was earlier on my list, and then I figured the other. So I first thought that it was noise getting on the line, and I was just dropping a bit here and there. So I figured, well, if I just chop down the number of bytes that I'm sending by half, then. But then the other part of that is, like you say, to speed it up. So yeah, that's high on the list.
Yeah, I think I'm using either 57,600 or 115,200. I forget which now. I can't look at it where I'm at now. So
I use a mix of both. You know, if I'm having to send over a radio, I have to use the 57,600. But if I'm just talking to what's on the board, you know, it's 115,200.
Yep. Oh, and one of the other things that I do when I enter into that routine, like it's constantly sending bytes to, in this case, it's a soft serial port. I actually empty the buffer because, you know, there's a bunch of accumulated values in there that are old. I don't really want to use those. So I just sit there and read until serial available is, is 0, and then fall out of that and then read the next one. And then I've got the newest one.
See, I was tempted to do that, but then I figured that since the data is coming out 10 hertz and I'm attempting to read it at 50, I have this hunch that it'll tend to clear it out on its own, just not in sync. But there should be a command to just flush it, right, to clear it out.
Yeah, but I don't think Arduino actually has a flush.
No,
it has a flush, but it doesn't do what flush is. It used to do that, but when they went to version 1, they changed what serial.flush did. So don't just say, oh, here's a flush function and it'll take care of the buffer.
So what does it do now? It sounds like it should have been flushing all along.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it does now. I just don't use it anymore, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know they changed it. Originally, you could do a flush and it cleared out basically set your high, what is it, your counter back to 0, and all that stuff was gone.
Maybe just set the input pointer equal to the output pointer.
Yeah, so it did something like that.
wasn't it someone on this call in the last couple of years that said if you really want to keep a handle on things, just don't use anybody else's code?
So serial.flush waits for the transmission of outgoing serial data to complete. And prior to Arduino 1.0, it instead removed any buffered incoming serial data. So that's what Doug's talking about changed it, and it doesn't do what you'd think it would anymore.
Yeah.
Did you just look that up, Paul?
Yeah. Because I knew what he was talking about. And it's like, yeah, they ruined the flash function. They changed it from being what a flash should be to essentially being a wait for IO to complete.
Now, typically modern hardware UARTs have interrupts, that can run either end of that equation or in the middle, or tell me when the transmission has begun, tell me when it's ended, tell me when the receipt of the character is done, tell me when the buffer hit a new line or whatever. All that stuff can be handled in hardware, and I don't know how. I haven't actually looked at the Arduino code. I don't know how they did it, but there are good ways and not so good ways to do that.
Guys, I gotta say, I appreciate your patience in helping me talk through this. And
Well, I was impressed with Paul. I thought he was just reeling that off the top of his head. Like that guy they have sitting over in the corner doing the soccer games that knows all the things.
I knew what Doug was talking about, and I've looked at it before, and I just wanted to confirm that my recollection was correct, which it was.
And flush doesn't actually mean flush. It means wait until we're done.
Yeah.
I guess that's a kind of a, no, it's not. When it's done, the buffer could be full.
It's bizarre.
maybe need new words.
Just something else to complain about.
There you go. All right. Something to add to our PID loop discussions. Okay. I think that I probably need to stop. I commandeered too much time here, but thanks everybody. And I don't know what I'll do next, but sounds like I'll be digging into byte level. Got to roll up the sleeves and stop relying on other people's stuff.
It's really, like I say, look at that link first, because that's probably your answer. Then the second thing is it's I think everybody gave enough information that it's really not that hard. It's probably what you're doing is probably harder than what we were telling you to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm never afraid to rely on other people's stuff, but you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Like, this last week, I was looking for an algorithm for computing checksums, and I found something on GitHub, and I tried it out. Turned out to be totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's just like anything. You find gems, when you go out to GitHub, and then you find just obviously what was a first pass at something, and the guy decided that, he didn't want to work on it anymore. You know what I mean?
Turds in those gems.
Yeah. So.
Well, you think about it though, I mean, if it weren't for all these libraries, it would probably take us forever to do what we try to do. And,
it's true. It's somewhere there's a line, right? Because make or buy, right?
Yeah.
Plagiarize or go from scratch.
I guess I kind of live in that gray space where I tend to go out and find their library and then hack on it until I'm happy with it.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's still fun it's still easier to find somebody who's done a lot of scratching to go find that and work. It's easier to polish the ball than it is to make the ball.
Yeah.
But Doug, I go back and I look at my own code and I go, what the hell was he doing?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing. You almost never find anything on GitHub where they've got unit test code there or self-test code.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
I was thinking the more specific experience of looking back at old code and thinking, well, that's so clumsy. There's so much obviously easier way to do that. So I start down that road and I go, oh, well, I'll have to make an exception for this. And and by the time I'm done, I'm back to where I was 4 years ago when I wrote the code.
And you figured out,
I just needed to leave a note to myself.
Yeah.
But if I do that with myself, I'm bound to do that with other people's code as well.
Yeah.
The amount of thought
That's why I
goes
did
into-
add as much comment as there is code.
Good for you.
It's amazing how many times I've rewritten. Otherwise, I group I take my program and break it into what would be, if you were doing C++, they'd be classes. But in my cases, they're files. There's an H file and a C file for types of functions. So like there's a motor functions, there's the GPS functions, there's and I do all that. So it's kind of compartmentalized, and I can improve it as I go over time. But I end up, almost every time I start a new robot, I use that as a starting point. But I always end up polishing the ball again, trying to get something that makes more sense.
And I always think, Doug, that I'm going to end up with one version of this that'll run on all my different robots.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen. It gets more and more specialized until they're not transferable.
Yeah.
So Carl, did we have anybody else in the queue?
Yeah, we had next by my measure, we had David Anderson, or no, David
No.
Ackley, I think.
David Unknown.
David A, David Unknown, and then Pat C, and then anyone after that was open mic.
I had nothing.
Nothing. Okay.
I got nothing.
So the other Dave A. Unknown.
Unknown. The other, the you.
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 There was, we talked briefly about MicroPython last time, and I've done some digging into things. I put on the list there under you some 3 different sites or that discuss that. And let me see if I can bring this up here. Let's see, I want to put this on the screen. Come on. There. And let's see if I can show it. Your entire screen. Oh, window. No, we want to show there. Share that. Okay. Go ahead and do not share your entire screen. Okay. Ignore. There we go. Okay. This up there is the URL, and I put that in my notes up there. But we were talking about MicroPython and the performance and the different ways of doing things. And this URL, which I've excerpted from, shows here doing blinking the light, an LED, with just straight byte codes, just the normal MicroPython. And then the next one is where it says native. And what that is that it takes the bytes and expands them. In other words, the byte codes, it takes those and just expands them into code, pure code, so that there's essentially you're eliminating the interpreter that is reading byte codes and figuring out what to do from there. Okay. And then the third one, which is called Viper, says, okay, let's just take what the routine is, what the MicroPython or the Python says, and emit pure code. That is not byte codes, but pure code. So those are the 3 different flavors that MicroPython provides. And then down here is running it on the Pi board, where the Pi board is as listed up here, is an STM32 405 running at 168 megahertz. Okay, that's what a Pi board is. So those are the times for blinking that light 1,000,000 times. Okay, and for the 3 different flavors of code generation. And I said, okay, now that's interesting. Oh, and he also points out, and like I said, if you look at the URLs I put there, I've excerpted from that. And he points out here that if you're running a Arduino Uno with C code and using their toggle the LED codes, it's running at almost 9 seconds to do 1,000,000 of them. Well, that's comparable to what you're getting with MicroPython, which is interpreted on the higher performance machines. And then I said, okay, well, that was for the Pi board. I said, okay, let's run the exact same code on the Pico and on a ESP32. And you see that the times are pretty comparable and the ratios between them is about the same. So just a point of interest of the fact that, yeah, you can get about a 2x improvement by using Viper over just straight code, straight MicroPython. And on the higher performance machines, you get about the same performance as C on an Arduino. And that's all I wanted to point out is that you're not paying a big penalty to use MicroPython for things. And the article that he has here about doing performance enhancement, he points out that, well, doing the first level, which is getting the right algorithm, is the most important. And then from there, you can do some refinements. And if all else fails, you can go to Viper. And if that fails, you can actually go to machine code. So there are ways, but his point is to says, okay, get the thing running functionally first and then worry about performance. And in terms of looking at performance, Carl pointed out a while back, I think, a very good way of looking at things. And that is that when you enter a routine, you set a IO pin high, and when you exit it, you set it low, and you look at it on a scope and see where you're spending your time. And then, only then, do you worry about optimizing the particular routines that are too slow. Anyhow, that's all I have.
I've noticed that people and organizations tend to overvalue speed in their code, but getting a wrong answer fast is useless code.
Yes, and I also in some of the stuff I've done have found that you can get an order of magnitude improvement by using a much better algorithm on certain things that are slow. And the things that are slow are where you're not doing it very effectively. Anyhow, that's all I had.
Cool.
That's really interesting, and it reminds me of what one of my colleagues instructed me in no uncertain terms. He reminded me of Donald Knuth, who said that premature optimization is the root of all evil, and that's really what you're pointing out. However, some other interesting perspective comes out of the data that you presented, which is that looking at the clock rate of Python running on 160 megahertz processor compared to C running on a 16 megahertz processor tells you that Python is running about 10 times slower than C on the Arduino. Clock cycle for clock cycle.
Yes, that's true. But also one of the things that people have pointed out is that if your program is running too slow, go to a faster processor, screw changing the code.
Yes. Yes.
I would only add to the comment you made about moving from compiled to assembled code, in that I discovered some years ago that a good GCC compiler, the GNU GCC compiler, if you give it the -f argument and stop and look at the assembly that your code is producing, and I've written a lot of assembly code, I think you'd be hard pressed to do a better job. A modern compiler is really damn good at generating assembly.
Yeah, in fact, one of the interesting things in history is that the very first compiler was for Fortran, and the criteria for the compiler was that assembly programmers should judge the code as being good that it was outputting. And when people were doing later compilers for Fortran, they went back and looked at the optimizations that the original Fortran was doing and discovered new things that were being done. So yeah.
Well, if you were going to write a really large piece of code, the ability of the compiler to keep track of things, like to leave things in registers from one call to the next and so forth, is probably beyond what a human would. I mean, you could do it, but it'd be hard for little things. You know, for a page worth of code, it may be worth doing. And the stuff I've done the last 10 years or so, often there's just a tiny amount of assembly, you know, a couple of lines for things that just really can't be done any other way. Not because, you know, it's faster to do them in code, but because, oh, I'm screwing around with the hardware, you know, popping things off the stack and sticking them in registers and stuff that you can't really do from.
Well, one of the things you talk about optimizations. One of the things I've rewritten a event simulator a number of times in different languages, and one of the things I did was going from C to C++, and it actually ran faster. And the conclusion I had was the reason it ran faster in the C++ was because it kept a pointer in a register pointing at the object, whereas the C did not. So,
yeah,
in terms of optimizing things.
I got a better compiler thing back in college when we were doing a bunch of this stuff. We had a bunch of Dell and we had their C compiler and these kinds of things. We were playing around, and so we constructed a very, very small program so we could understand what GCC was doing versus the Dell paid a lot of money for a compiler. And so the program was basically multiply 2 by 2. That was all it did. You know, just main 2 by 2. That's all it did. So we got it and we compiled that with the Dell compiler and looked at the assembly output of that with the -S kind of thing. There must have been, I don't know, a few hundred lines of code to do this. GCC gets up here and we look at it. It's got literally one line of code in there.
Return 4.
It did not. No, actually, it was almost that good. It said left shift 1 on the register, and it was done. I mean, literally 2 lines of code done.
Well, often
register left shifted.
Often when I'm learning a new microprocessor, new architecture, I do that very thing, right? Little tiny bits of code, you know, add one number to another and return it. I want to see how they're setting up the stack and how the arguments are passed and all that sort of thing. And often you got to get in there and be sure all the default optimization is turned off, because if you just write a little function that says, you know, return 2 times 2, it just returns 4. It doesn't bother to do them.
It doesn't bother to actually do anything. Yeah.
I remember reading at one point about a maxim that compiler writers live by. First, make it fast. First, make it correct. Then, make it fast.
Well, and you know, if you've written a lot of assembly, you can do tricks that can make things run super fast that can come back and bite you on the ass. You know, that can absolutely not be modified, or, you know, it's easy to get in trouble. It's a sharp knife.
It's the double-edged sword.
So has anybody here worked in Rust? Does anybody have an opinion about Rust?
All I know is some real smart guys I work with and improving. A couple of them really love it. That's about all I got.
I played with it a little bit.
I've read that it's really popular right now. It's up and coming.
Well, Linus has put in some infrastructure in the Linux kernel to support Rust. I don't think any of the kernel is written in Rust yet, but they're creeping toward it. You know, I don't know that we, in what we do, have the kind of security issues that an environment like that is designed to solve. You know, David was referring to the Fortran compilers, and if you remember that crufty old Fortran code, you could do things like you define a common block where you put all your variables, and then you can have a pointer offset from the base of that block to pick out any variable anywhere in the group. And obviously, if you went back and compiled things differently and it put that common block together differently, then all that stuff would break. But it's not just getting outside of the array boundaries, it's getting outside of everybody's array boundaries. You know? You go up there and read back code if you wanted to. So surely it's an improvement to have languages that don't let us do that.
So if, as long as we're on general computing and not on robots, I've got a show and tell if people are interested. That, I mean, it's not robots, but it's something that I've been working on for the last month or so.
Yeah, but I think I'd love to see it, but I believe Pat's got something to show us.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So we'll put Paul on the list because I want to see it. Anything Paul's been working for a month on is going to be interesting. So we want to see it, but let's see, give Pat a chance here before he freezes up there and all we see is the static screen.
Icicles from the top coming down.
Yeah, I came home to a back deck coated in ice, so it wasn't nice yesterday getting home.
It was 70 degrees today.
Well,
we're not kidding. It really was.
Most of it melted. It was about 4 degrees C. So I'll be quick so Paul can have his time to do what he wants. I just have a quick share on a drive I bought for the Raspberry Pi. So I found these on Amazon. They were fairly cheap. I pulled up Amazon.com US site, and it's 128 gigabyte. And if everybody could see my screen, just a little NVMe drive. And I bought a little enclosure for it. And I took one of the backups I had from the existing drives on my Raspberry Pi and imaged it over to this thing and picked up and worked right away. It was quite surprising that it worked that well. I've been hit and miss trying to find a drive that actually works with the Raspberry Pi. Some work, some don't. I know we've all had issues with that. But this one seemed to work right away.
Without an SD card, right? When we say work,
SD card.
Yeah, so it just picked right up on it and went.
Yeah, I changed the command line .txt file to look for SDA2 to boot instead of the UUID.
Yeah.
And it picks it up right away. Usually when you use the SDB2 or SDA2, sorry, it takes a slightly longer to find the drive and access it properly, but then once it finds it, it just works.
Did that have a heat sink on it?
Yes, it did.
Can you go back to that? Because I didn't see the price or the.
Well, I'll paste the link in the chat.
Yeah,
it was $17.
That's
Wow.
$17 US, I believe it was.
That's the drive, but the enclosure was $29.
Yeah, so the enclosure was cheaper a couple of weeks ago. It went up. I think I paid $23 Canadian for the enclosure.
Okay.
And now it's at $39 Canadian.
Well, that certainly gets around the micro SD card corruption problem, right? Unless it has the same vulnerability where you pull the power and during a write.
They all have that problem. I did share the link, and I'll put the screen back up.
thank you.
So $17.99. If you guys are in the US, so you can ignore the $8.90 shipping to Canada.
Wow.
And the enclosure, I found that's expensive because I had it for $23.99, I think it was, free shipping with Amazon Prime. And it works. Just uses one of the little, I don't know if they show it. They don't show the actual drive. So small, tiny, fits in just about anywhere. And you can use it. Basically, the drive is just one of these little
Sticks.
just one of these little sticks, yeah. So you got to watch the keying on them, and so this one is a 1 terabyte that actually come out of my PC. I upgraded to a 2 terabyte a couple of weeks ago during our meeting. Actually, I was copying it over, and I think it was the contest weekend. I was copying my C drive over to the new drive.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's all I had. I just wanted to let you guys know that I've had very good luck with that. When I looked at it, I believe under fdisk-L, it showed sector size of 512 bytes.
Yes, that's the trick. That's the one thing. The Pi will only accept that.
Yeah.
So if you buy some, I've bought a lot of the small drives off of Amazon, and some of them would work, and some of them wouldn't. And the thing that stops the ones that don't work is they will not allow a sector size less than, I think it's 1024 or something like that. And that's the thing. So, and the problem is if you go look at the reviews, the guy says, yeah, it works on Raspberry Pi. Well, yeah, it does. If you put an SD card in it too.
Yeah.
But
so if you put an SD card with your boot sector and everything on the SD card,
they'll all work.
Point everything over to your hard drive to run on your root, then everything will work.
Yeah.
But this one works very well without an SD card.
Yeah. That's
the
trick.
guess my question would be, and I'm going to show something here. Why wouldn't you just do this for $16, 128 gig SanDisk high quality SD card, class 10?
So you're 100 megabytes per second. Okay.
Okay.
If you compare it to the one I showed you, which is 1600 megabytes per second, 1800 megabytes per second.
Oh, okay. So the issue you're pointing out is speed.
They're also more reliable too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But speed is, you get a big boost in speed. And some of them don't, some of them just sip power, so they're not really a drag on the Raspberry Pi. I have grabbed old SATA 6 SD drives that I had when 128 gigs was a big one. And they'll work too, but they tend to be a little power hungry.
That's been my standard. I typically aim for the 64 gig if I could find them for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
Usually $20, sometimes less for a 64 gigabyte drive.
Yeah.
And like you say, with a 6 gigabyte per second write speed, and they tend to work good if you can find them, like you say, with the 512 byte sector size.
And you might say, well, why don't you just change it for 512? It's because the drive is actually hardwired for 1024.
Yeah, 1024 or 48.
Yeah, they're hard. You can't do it because it's built into the drive.
So
I've had some work
coming late to the conversation. I may have missed the key part of information I was interested in. There was a problem with the SD cards getting corrupted, and is that not true about these sticks?
Anything can get corrupted when it fails,
or power turned on
when
and
power
off.
fails. If you're in the middle of writing a file, whatever you're writing is going to be corrupted.
Well, careful now. There's two types of corruption you can get. I've been I've addressed this many times. One is, yes, any file that you're writing at the time you pull the power, it's going to get corrupted if you pull it right in the middle of the write. But that won't make your entire file system unusable unless it's like a system file. The other type of corruption that is totally unrecoverable from is if you pull the power while the actual SD card circuitry is in the middle of a write, you won't even be able to use that SD card anymore. That's the worst kind of corruption, and it's happened. I've seen it happen before. So then I think what Pat is saying is that under the hood, the micro SD card and that solid state drive, they're the same technology under the hood. So, if you interrupt the write cycle when you're doing a solid state write in the solid state circuitry, you're going to corrupt the device. Now, who knows? Maybe they've designed something into these solid state drives that Pat pointed to that minimize that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I do know, John, that it's harder to corrupt. I've never corrupted one of the SD drives. Okay. I never had a problem with it. And now I try to shut down normally most of the time, but
well, it doesn't happen very often. You have to hit it just when
right.
The CPU has sent a command to the micro SD card, and the micro SD card is in the middle of flashing. All right, and that's right where your vulnerable point is. It doesn't happen often enough, but if you keep yanking power on your Pi on a regular basis, it'll eventually bite you.
Yeah, but that'll happen even on your PC.
Well, I don't know, the PC design, whether or not they put hardware in there to keep current flowing to the micro SD card for a few fractions of a second longer to avoid that. Maybe they've got some complex circuitry in there. I don't know. I have no idea.
And the SSD might do that too. Is what I guess what I was getting at. Because like I said, I've never had any problem with them.
I have.
Well, my micro SD card is a bit more primitive.
Oh, excuse me. Did I say SD card? I didn't mean. I said SD drive.
SD drive, yeah.
SS. I guess they're SSD.
Yeah, I corrupted my SSD.
I got two printers that are running off of Raspberry Pis with Octoprint. And I just shut them off. I mean, I got a switch on the power supply, and I've never corrupted it. I mean, of course, it's idle when I shut them off.
Yeah, that's the key. You're only vulnerable when you're writing.
Yeah. So when I shut them off, everything's done, and I'm done printing, and I just want to shut down my man shed here, and I'll power them off, and I've done it for years, with these Raspberry Pis. But like you said, John, I wasn't writing or reading from the thing when I shut them off.
Right, but see, you never know. Maybe it depends on what you have running on your Pi. You might have some system service that's logging on a regular basis. So it's like always writing to a log file.
It's
and so at that point you become more vulnerable.
But this is Linux, right? Raspberry Pi runs Linux.
Yes, it's Linux. You load Linux on there.
And Linux has multiple journaling file systems that solve that very problem. We got big systems at work that every once in a while, the building power goes out and the UPS finally gives up the ghost and they crash. And then we turn them back on, they fix themselves. So why doesn't the Pi do that?
Not there yet. They've tried to add it into the kernel, I believe, a couple times, some different journaling file systems.
But that's just Ubuntu, right? I mean, it's already there.
I can't answer your question, David, but all I can tell you is from experience, I was rebooting and rebooting my Pi with booting off of an SSD, and eventually it corrupted some system file on the SSD, and I haven't recovered it yet. I searched all over the place to try and find out what was corrupted.
Like I said, there's two types of corruption. You either corrupt the file, or you actually corrupt the micro SD card where you can't even read it anymore. And that's the one that's worst. is when you catch that micro SD card in the middle of a flash cycle, and you kill it right there. You kill the power right there. You make the card completely unusable. It has nothing to do with
this is obviously a problem we need to solve before we can send our robots to Mars.
Well, you don't use Raspberry Pis or micro SD cards.
Good point.
Well,
or like I said, you design something into the system where if you do suddenly use power, you've got a large capacitor in there that keeps current flowing to the solid state circuitry long enough to make sure the flash completes before the power completely dies.
But that's what I'm saying. These problems were solved long ago.
Yeah, but not for $35.
Is a $30, $40, $50 computer, So.
But David, there are pieces of the Linux boot, specifically the Ubuntu boot, which I was using, that actually run off of a FAT32 file system. And to John's point, that I think that's what happened to me is I corrupted some system file. I couldn't find what was corrupted in the and you're right, the journaling should fix it, but for whatever reason, it didn't. And
Well, in that case in particular, I would think that the boot partition, which is set up as a Windows partition, is read-only, right? You're just booting from it. You're not writing to it.
Yeah. So Paul, you in your case, it sounded like you corrupted a system file, but you didn't corrupt the flash, the actual flash.
No, I could still look at the disk after the unbootable disk, and it was all the files I could tell were still there, and I could see the Ubuntu root file system.
Yeah.
But it just wouldn't boot.
When you corrupt the flash, when you manage to hit it just right where you corrupt the flash, you can't get that flash card to read anything anymore.
Oh, that must be frustrating.
Yeah, because anything you had on it, no matter what you plug it into, it is unusable. I've had that with at least one Raspberry Pi, and I've learned to occasionally image my flash drive for anything important.
Well, have they sent any SSI drives, up into the space, the ISS, or do those things work in the hard, reality of space?
Well, then you get gamma rays, that can damage the circuitry. That's
Right.
a whole other animal.
Right.
I know they sent Raspberry Pis up there because they sent little CubeSats and all sorts of things up there.
I just wonder what they're using for their main storage.
Memories, yeah.
Core memory.
Yeah, magnetic core memory, yeah. On the original space shuttle.
It's real hard to beat holes in a piece of paper tape.
Unless it rains on it.
Well, I'm done with my little.
Yeah, but your paper tape was plasticized, so you were all right.
Okay. Cool.
Well, thank you, Pat. That was interesting.
It could still get caught in the reader and rip it apart.
That was a nice little widget. So
in space, they store things on golden records. That's the official approach.
What's a golden record?
Oh, Pioneer, Viking. You never heard about the golden records that were placed on them?
Oh yeah. Edison would be proud, right?
On a rover on Saturn, or a lander on Saturn or Mars or something, where you went in and put your name on NASA's list and off it went.
No, we have highly stylized drawings of us naked. That's what they sent into deep space. And the message that came back, according to Saturday Night Live, was send more Chuck Berry.
So, Paul, I think
I don't remember what was recorded on the records.
I think it was a lot of different kinds of music.
About a month ago, I showed this little widget on the to the group. It's a little ESP32 gadget with a USB-C and Grove connector on one end, a few IOs on on the end and a little LCD and some buttons. And so since then, it's the application is, so I've got an application that I've been working on that is a combination Arduino and cloud kind of thing. And that's what I want to share with you. So if you look at the screen, you'll see the number is incrementing. That's the little text says liters used. So this is meant, there's a water flow simulator running on the under the Arduino code, but on ESP32, that's simulating the flow of water, and that's why the total is incrementing, is because it's simulating water flowing through one of these Hall effect water devices. And so the application here is my brother-in-law's farm has a water tank, like a 20,000 liter water tank that's filled by rainwater in winter, and he wants it to last through the summer, and it feeds the farm and the troughs, the cattle troughs down on the farm or the ranch, gentleman's ranch, 15 acres or so. But the cattle, like they will mess with the ballcock valves in the troughs, and sometimes they break them, and the water can flow out of the storage tank without bounds until it out of the broken valve on the trough until it empties the tank, and then the cattle have no water, and my brother has to order a tanker of water, and that costs money and so forth. And so he said, boy, it'd be nice if there was something that would cut off the flow of water after a certain amount of water has flowed. So I thought, yeah, I can do that. And so I'm going to share, hopefully you guys are seeing the flow limiter page now. Is that coming through?
Yes.
So I wrote a design spec for it, which I'm kind of proud of because I think it's good engineering. But in a nutshell, the block diagram has this little IoT device, the ESP32 based device, sensing water flow from the tank from a flow sensor, where the flow sensor is one of these little things with an impeller and a Hall effect sensor that turns as water flows, and a shut-off valve that can be controlled to shut off water to the farm, and a bypass valve just for grins. And the IoT device, because these devices have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, will connect to his home Wi-Fi and talk to an app in the cloud. And so that's what I've been constructing and what I want to show you guys today, because I'm quite kind of proud of it. And so the Arduino code is pretty straightforward. There are simple examples on how to get one of these ESP32 devices to connect to AWS using MQTT as a data transfer protocol to send data up to the cloud. And so here is this. Now we're up in the cloud and on AWS in the IoT module. And if you watch this time and the cumulative flow, you'll see that it's 1601 now, and every 5 seconds or so, it's 1607 now. It increments the time and the latest cumulative flow for the day and the incremental flow, and that actually aligns. The little LCD display is saying 2,657 liters, and that pretty much aligns with the cumulative flow today. and then the shutoff field is what's intended to be the shutoff valve that stops water from flowing. So right here, what you can see is that, yay, verily, this little ESP32 running some Arduino code is publishing JSON data up into the cloud, into the IoT module. And from the IoT module, then there's a module called Kinesis, Amazon Kinesis, which is basically a pipeline. And the IoT module sticks its data into Kinesis, and Kinesis sticks it into storage, which is called S3 storage in Amazon parlance. And so what you have here, it bundles it up in I think 5-minute increments. I'm going to increase that to 10-minute increments, but you can see that it's time stamped with today's date 11/29 at 23:09 and 9, and then 5 minutes after, a few minutes after that. It just rolled over the date. This is the date time in UTC, and so it's starting to fill out the data from 11:30, and you can look at the data in here by clicking on this, and then you say download, and it downloads, and then you say open the file, and this is you guys probably aren't seeing this file now, are you?
No, we're not.
Okay. Well, let me just promise you that it shows the same data as we looked at that was coming through the AWS IoT JSON stream. And then what you do is you plug it into Athena. And Athena is a database engine available in AWS. And by the way, I'm working in the free tier of AWS. So using they allow you a pretty decent amount of storage and of queries before they start charging you for anything on AWS. So I'm quite impressed. But anyway, I imported the data from the file flow data 1127. So that was the 27th of November. And this SQL query selects the field's time selects time, and cum being the cumulative flow, and inc meaning the incremental flow from flow database dot flow data 1127, and orders it by time. And out of that, you get this table of search results of database query results showing the flow. And you can see here where I've got the simulator simulating zero flow, and then it jumps up to about 2.8 liters per second of flow, and then it drops to zero again, and so it turns flow on and off every now and then, just to keep data flowing. And then finally, two things I want to do out of this. One is in alerts when it shuts off flow because excessive flow has been detected, and the second is to enable graphing flow. Well, unfortunately, AWS charges you like $20 a month for their QuickSight business intelligence graphing app, but Grafana is a graphing utility that offers a free level of graphing, and these are the kinds of flow you can do time series graphs here. And so what you're seeing here is from the date 11/27. This is the cumulative data flow, and it actually goes up, and then I unplugged the device, powered it off, powered it back on again, so flow started again at zero. and it grew to 1,200 to 1,449 liters. Then I power cycled it again and went back down to zero, did a couple of power cycles. You get the idea of being able to graph stuff in the cloud. And this top graph is the flow rate that we were just looking at, where it turns it on and off. And I think if we like were to zoom in close enough here, you see where you can actually see the flow going up to its level of 2.88 and then going back down to zero. So all of that to say that this thing is actually coming together, and a little Arduino code, which if anyone's interested, I can share some of the key statements in the Arduino code, but suffice it to say that it's running on this little ESP32 thumb-sized computer, which is simulating data from a flow sensor, but the flow sensor is just a digital I/O, so I'll just poll that. And it really is publishing data to an app in the cloud that then enables graphing it and will enable alerts to be displayed. So that was my little show and tell for what I've been up to.
Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Here's my question. This, as I understand, the motivation here is because there actually already is equipment to cut off the flow, and the cows are breaking it. So what keeps the cows from breaking this?
Well, no, there isn't equipment to cut off the flow at a farm-wide level.
Only at a tank level?
Only at a trough level.
So that's sort of like the thing on the back of the toilet, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's a floating ball hooked up to a ball cock valve, and that's what the cattle have access to. And they like nudge around on it, and they break the ball off the stem, and then the valve.
So your flow sensor and your cutoff valve will be where they can't get to them.
Yes, they're up in my brother-in-law's shed, which is within Wi-Fi range of the house.
So the module you held up, you mentioned cellular link. I assume it does not have the cellular hardware included.
This particular module does not have cellular hardware included. This is an M5 stack device, and they do have a really nifty device which I would like to play with, and just haven't got that far yet. But they have this Adafruit M5 stack development kit. Actually, let me just go somewhere else. It's got it's a 2.5 inch by 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter with LCD and touchscreen device, but that wasn't where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to M5 Stack, who manufactures this range of products, of IoT devices that are intended for this kind of thing. And here's a kind of a graphic of the top unit with its display and touchscreen, and then you can put modules in there. One of the modules that you can get is actually an cellular LTE-M device, and LTE-M, I've come to learn, is a pretty cheap cellular low data capacity link that will hook up to a LTE cell network worldwide, and you can buy SIM cards for it for $1 a piece, that will run for like 10 years. Now there are limits on the data. It's something like 5K a day, or something reasonable that you can do something reasonable with. but you can see how it plugs in underneath, and then you can get like digital I/O or LAN or relay modules that go underneath it. So this is one of their styles of IoT devices, the M5 stack. What I showed you, what I have in my hands is the M5 stick, which is this little orange thing that I waved in front of the camera with a couple of buttons and a tiny LCD. And then they've got a more modular sort of like industrial kind of thing that I don't know really anything about the Atom series. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Paul, is this the device you showed us a month or so ago, and that one of the accessories was a strap so you could wear it like a watch?
You could imagine doing that. It is the device I showed about a month ago, and you could imagine doing something like uh, uh, like oh, my brain has failed me.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Like Ray did, with his little, he had his little like 2-inch by 2-inch LCD display with a Velcro strap around it. So you could envision doing something like that.
Wearable.
Yeah.
The chick magnet.
Yeah,
check.
right.
Yeah, chick magnet.
And just to give you a feel for the pricing of these things, this Stack series box, 5cm by 5cm with touch LCD is $40. The orange one is $20. So it's pretty cheap. But anyway, I think I mean you guys all get the power of hooking up to the cloud, and not that it's necessarily always appropriate for robots, but for technology generally, it's pretty neat. And it
Paul,
really
could you
didn't
link
take
that?
much to hook it up to AWS. Yeah.
Could you link that web page in the chat? I'm sure you've already done that.
Oh yeah, sure. Which one, the M5 stack or my webpage?
Both.
Okay. And I guess while I'm showing this stuff, okay, there's my webpage with the flow limiter, and here's the M5 stack with their product line. And one thing I'll just show this just because I guess I'm kind of proud of it, is because I think it's decent engineering. I wrote up requirements for the cloud section, the IoT device, and the water subsystem. Water subsystem being the flow sensor and associated valves. And so that's like good engineering to write up requirements. And I even included IoT non-functional requirements like temperature, environment, protection against ambient sawdust and insects, because the IoT device will be inside, and non-requirements for things that I considered, but decided they weren't justified in making them requirements. For example, daylight savings or time zones. And yeah, it's got the IoT device uses the button to let you set the date and time, and it will have the daily water use limit. I haven't set that yet. So anyway, this in my mind is decent engineering, is defining the system design and the requirements. And so I'm
Oh, he's not using Agile.
No, it's horrible. There's nothing about blockchain in there.
Let me tell you about Agile. I was at HP when a team organized for the introduction of Agile into our embedded system environment, and the net effect of that, after about a year and a half of never meeting requirements and never being able to promise, never actually having requirements, never being able to promise when use cases would be delivered, was that the team, their manager, the section manager, the lab manager, and the VP all ended up leaving HP within short order.
Yeah, but the agile zealots will just tell you, well, you were just doing it wrong.
Well, but I'll give another perspective on this, because I did actually, subsequent to that implosion in our group that really destroyed a good bit of it, I joined a team that looked at how to introduce agile into an environment, into a corporate environment. And there are really 2 points that I think are worth bringing out. One is that agile is well suited to an environment where requirements are constantly in flux, or are not very stable, and where the stakeholders don't have much time to spend on evaluating the requirements. So that's an environment like Walmart, where you've got managers of Christmas product lines who are busy trying to sell and get their stores stocked and control advertising, and some stupid Burke in IT is trying to query them about how should the website work that advertises this stuff. It's not well suited to an embedded system where customers want their environment to be stable for years at a time. So that's point number one, is the suitability of the application to agile programming, or to agile development. Well, I guess that's really point one and two. One is the stability of the requirements, and the other is the type of device that it's going to, whether it's a website that's likely to change pretty quickly, or whether it's an embedded system that you're going to build once and it'll last for 5 years.
Yeah, I retired from Siemens PLM about 5 years ago, and we went through a transition period from waterfall to agile, and there was a lot of pain. And I came to realize at the end of it that there are types of products, and there are types of organizations where agile will work, and there are types of products and organizations where agile will just be almost never work. And one of the cases where it doesn't work very well is where you have an established product, a large system, and if you can't restructure your system software around the teams, it's very, very difficult to do.
Yes, you're exactly right, John. And we were building a high-end server, and the other thing, the second point that, or maybe it's a third point that deserves to be mentioned about Agile, is you got to be able to get the whole of the organization, all of the stakeholders involved. And we were building a server where some of the stakeholders were marketing, who was selling these $1 million computers, the OS team, who was developing the operating system and customizing it to HVUX to run on the servers, and the deployment, the customer-facing deployment teams who dealt with the sales engineers. And everyone has to buy into this notion that it is what it is, it's shippable at a point in time, and you just can't get marketing in your tradition, and manufacturing. You got to get manufacturing to agree that they'll ship whatever it is.
Everybody has to agree. Everyone has to, not just the software developers, everybody up and down the chain has to adopt a different mindset about how the product gets delivered.
You sound like you've experienced the same pain that I experienced.
Yeah, I was
blew so many developers and managers out of HP when they tried to implement it naively.
I was a Scrum Master for a couple of years of my last job.
Yeah, Good. Well, good job. Good on you. And I'm not going to say Agile doesn't work because, like you say, in the right environment, it can do wonders.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
you know,
it's
Paul,
just like any other process that has come along in the past several decades. It tends to be a little faddish, you know.
Yeah.
There's one company sees wild successes, you know, and they go, look at them, look at what they did, and then everybody piles on,
right,
doing the same thing without really truly understanding what they're getting into.
Yes, that's exactly what happened at HP.
What, David?
I was just going to say that if you take this from the large scale to the small scale, and you think about the way most of us work on our robots, then okay, you got a new sensor. This is not part of some grand design. You don't even really know what it works or what it does. So step one is I'm going to write this real simple driver, and I'm going to look at the data. And that simple driver may end up years from now buried down inside what you end up doing with this sensor. But it's very different because I won't call it a random walk, but we don't really know where we're going. We discover along the way where we're going. And that's very different than having somebody pay you money to make something for them.
Yes.
Or you don't really have the option to say, well, we're going to see what it does. You know, I worked with it for 6 months and I decided I don't want to do that anymore. You know.
Yeah, I was going to say more, but if you still have somebody in the queue, Carl, this could go on for a long time.
Yeah, I don't have anyone else in the queue. I just have an interesting story from a company that launched a satellite and built a phone, and one was exceedingly waterfall and the other was exceedingly agile, and they had to come together. That was quite an exciting time.
Yeah, I've definitely been through the process. I mean, it's not easy for most companies to make the transition. What we wound up with, we all kind of joked about it. We called it Agile Fall because we could never get rid of the waterfall baggage. When you have an existing large system, a software system, and you try to switch over to Agile, you've got so much baggage that from the waterfall that comes with it. It's really, really hard to shake. And one of the big problems we ran into was in Agile, you try to break your development up into Scrum teams, and you say, well, this piece over here belongs to this Scrum team, and this piece over here belongs to this Scrum team, and supposedly, as one of the jobs as a Scrum Master is, you take your piece of work and you try to make everybody outside the team go away. It's like nobody interferes with what my team is doing. Is we do it all by ourselves. Well, in an existing framework, it's almost impossible to do. One of the problems we had our Scrum team was an application team, and they had another team that was a framework team. And anytime the customer wanted a new feature, it took both modification to the framework and modification to the application that had to both be complete in order to do the job. Well, it was chicken and egg. I can't develop the application without the framework being there first. Well, then they'd say, well, your team should just go ahead and work on the framework. And then the framework guys would come along and say, no. You don't understand our code and you can break it. So they wouldn't let us, in order for us to get a feature out, you know, we couldn't do it because we couldn't own all the code. We had these teams that had their little fiefdoms, and they say, don't touch our code because you'll break it and you don't understand it. Which is equally as bad because Agile pretty much encourages you to throw away all design documentation. So of course nobody's going to understand your code. So I could go on and on, but it's kind of funny, you know, the kind of problems we ran into, you know, when trying to do Agile. And we'd have these sprints where half of our stories, I'm trying to remember the term, turned out to be where you actually do something, but you don't produce something at the end. What was it, Paul? What do you call that? A story that's like that? It's
not an epic.
It's where you try something out, but you don't actually release something at the end of the sprint.
It's called a spike.
A spike. Yeah, we would have these we'd have these sprints where half of our stories were spikes.
That's okay. That's okay to do that. I mean, because the idea between all this, I mean, I talk this stuff all the time. It's okay to have spike stories. The thing is, you're given the whole idea though is given the stakeholders and the product owners and the people that are actually going to assume this is value or not a real fast spin cycle to decide whether they like it or not. That's just that's it in the detail. Now people can go right crazy and do a bunch of other crap to it, but the real thing is, at the end of the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks or whatever your sprint is, we're going to show you something, and you get to tell us whether you like it or not. Or are we going in the right direction? Agile can be that simple. If it's anything more than complicated than that, people are making it more complicated than that.
Yeah,
That's
well, there shouldn't be. The point being is that you shouldn't be in a regular pattern of producing, of having half your team doing spikes in every sprint. That there's an indication that you're having a problem.
That's maybe an indication that, yeah, that you're having a problem. Like somebody didn't think this through enough to even get started, right? Like I was on a team once where we were kind of doing that sort of thing, and they were literally wanting us to put finished carpentry in, and they hadn't even put in the plumbing. They hadn't even put in they hadn't stubbed out all the plumbing and the gas lines and the electrical work, and they want us to put on finished carpentry and put on the I'm using an analogy of a house, and put on the drywall and paint it and be done with it when they don't even have plumbing in the walls.
Yeah,
and that's just a problem. I mean, that Agile didn't cause that, right?
And most of the time, the reason we did have all those spikes is precisely what I was talking about before. We had all this baggage that from the waterfall system that you simply could not. There were so many barriers in the way, you couldn't knock them all down in 2 weeks to get something completed.
Harold, is that what we used to call all hat, no cattle?
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, and that can happen a lot of times when I say going to the transition, I mean, some people are permanently transitioning, right? Because there's always going to be people that want to do it their way, or they want to mold it in their way, and they don't want to change and all those kinds of things. I get all that. But I have seen some of that too. And every time I've seen one of those, it's because there's some old school, like we've been doing this for 50 years and we're going to keep doing it for 50 years. God, that's what it was working before. Well, how about maybe there's a better way. Now, whether the Agile thing's a better way, I don't know. It's up to you. But just because you've been doing something for 50 years doesn't mean that maybe you can rethink how you're doing it and maybe come up with a better way. You might not. Sometimes, when you go drive a nail in a piece of wood with a hammer, there's some faster ways to do it, but essentially we're doing it the same way we've been doing it for pretty much ever. Right. So maybe there's not a better way, but maybe there is. And sometimes people aren't open. They're just not open to even looking at it. That's what kills me, actually.
It called to mind Beavis and Butthead's complaint. I don't want to have to learn anything.
Oh, there's a very popular guy out now. I believe his name is Andrew Tate. He's a very popular guy, big pop guy. This thing, I saw a video short of him the other day because I watched way too much of YouTube. And he's like, my problem, what the problem is you read. Reading's a waste of time. If I got to read on something to know what it is, then it's just a waste of time for me. And I'm like,
well, there is a certain approach from which that might be true. I worked for this lady who was a consultant for a while, and people were always giving her things. They wanted her to speak highly of them. She came back to the lab one day and she dumped this. It was a food processor, right? A blender. And it had like, an instruction manual that thick. And that's what she said. She said, I'm not going to read this.
I've had other people do too. And I will give you
read this manual.
If you got to make an instruction manual that thick for a very common item.
Yeah, for a food processor. That's what she said. Nobody's going to buy this once they see that manual.
You probably done something wrong.
Well, she left it with us, assuming that this was when I worked with Dwayne Gustavus. Harold, you knew him. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We worked for Portia Isaacson. She expected that we would read it and come back and give her some opinion about it, but we weren't about to read it.
Well, I dealt with a purchasing agent at Sperry one time, and he said when the weight of the documentation for an airplane exceeds the weight of the airplane, the airplane will not fly.
Well, yeah, and like I said, I'm pointing out some of the problems with Agile, but that's the point being is that Agile is not a failure. I mean, it's
No,
trying to address the very problems you're talking about. That the same problem we had when I worked back at Motorola, where we found that we would literally spend 9 months just writing the requirements,
Yeah.
and then maybe 6 months writing the code, and that's not terribly productive.
no, it's not. I mean, and to that point, if you would have, you might have spent that same 9 months to get out something done in the thing, but because as you were doing the documentation, you found stuff you liked or you didn't like, and you retreated, and then you went forward and retreated. But at the end of the 9 months, you had all your documentation and your code done at the same time, or pretty close. You don't have that extra 6 months to the end trying to implement all the stuff that may or may not work. That's kind of the idea behind all of that.
Yeah, right. So there are problems. There are problems with both types of processes.
Yep, there are, no doubt.
And I relative to the comment earlier about needing spikes to plan how you're going to introduce some major new feature that requires architectural support. When I was on the team after this big failure in what I call naive Agile, and we got in touch with someone called Leffingwell, who wrote a book on enterprise Agile, how to do Agile at the enterprise level. And through him, we contacted John Deere, and we got John Deere's Agile. What do you call it? Someone who promotes an idea. They're advocate.
Champion.
Yeah.
Advocate or
evangelist.
Evangelist. That's the word. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
So we got him on the line and started asking him, well, how do you deal with this, architectural issues? Because he started out saying, we've got 3 teams all doing Agile, 500 people in each team, one in the US, one in Germany, and one somewhere, maybe India. And we were like, okay,